Okay, you're up to date with the week's big headlines. Now to some of the most impactful and most important stories this week, and what impacts us more than a war. The war in Ukraine is no exception. Soon it will be a year old. Some 7,000 civilians alone have died since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. More than 11,000 people have been injured, and these are civilians alone. What about the soldiers? Well, the United States estimates that at least 200,000 soldiers have died on both sides. Yes, 200,000, that's a huge number. And you know, whether we like it or not, it's not just what is happening in Ukraine and in Russia. This war has affected us all. You don't need to have to be related to the soldiers who died or the civilians who died. You don't need to be in Ukraine or have family in Ukraine to feel the pinch of this war. Just look at your wallets or your mobile banking app and you will see the toll of this war. It has cost us all by burning a hole in our pockets. And that's just one part of the story. The war has led to an energy crisis. It has catalyzed the impending recession across the world, contributing to a slowdown in the global economy. It's contributed to job losses. And we are seeing the impact of all of these, and we're going to be touching upon all of these issues on this program tonight. And we begin with the latest. Germany has refused to promise German-made tanks to Ukraine. We're talking about these tanks, the Leopard 2. These are supposed to be Germany's best-in-class war machines. But German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is not feeling too generous. Scholz says Germany is not saying a no to sending the Leopards to Ukraine, but he wants the United States to send American tanks to Ukraine first. These ones, the M1 Abrams. Why is this news? One, because you have two of NATO's most prominent members playing rock, paper, scissors over sending tanks to Ukraine. And guess who stands to lose out? Yes, Ukraine.
We are really looking forward to aid. I am grateful to all the countries who support us. Do not hesitate. There is no need to compare. If you say, I will give tanks if someone else also gives tanks, or I am powerful in Europe, but I will help if someone else outside of Europe also helps. It seems to me that it's not a very correct strategy.
Reason number two, Germany has a unique voting power. Since it's the original maker of the Leopard, Germany gets to decide whether the countries it has exported the tanks to get to re-export them. Poland has these tanks, so does Finland. Spain has 200 Leopard 2 tanks, and Ukraine needs all of these tanks. Its President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that Ukraine needs at least 300 Western tanks to win the war. 300 is a big number. So who's actually sending so many tanks? Earlier this week, the Spanish foreign minister said that the question of sending tanks to Ukraine is, quote, not on the table, unquote. Britain, on the other hand, has announced it will be sending Challenger 2 battle tanks, at least 14 of them. 14 is a long distance away from 300. France, too, is considering sending its Leclerc tanks. Now, here's something you need to keep a close eye on. Defense ministers of the Ukraine contact group will be meeting at a U.S. Ramstein air base in Germany. This is where it's located on the map. Now, who all are part of the Ukraine contact group? NATO members and some other countries. What are they going to be discussing? NATO's General Secretary, Jens Stoltenberg, has said the discussion will be around delivering, quote, more advanced support, heavier weapons, and more modern weapons, unquote. But how much and how many? Zelensky's weapon wish list has only been growing. Not too long ago, Ukraine's president wanted the West to give Ukraine an air defense system. Now he wants 300 Western tanks to win the war.
The war in Ukraine began in February 2022. In the months that followed, at least 30 countries provided military aid to Kyiv. The United States of America leads the long list of donors, with commitments worth $18.51 billion. Germany is next. It has sent and promised military aid worth $2.34 billion. The other top donors are the United Kingdom, Poland, Canada, France, Czech Republic, Sweden, Estonia, and Italy. So, who's sent what? In December 2022, the US made global headlines by announcing export of the Patriot missile system to Ukraine. This missile system has a range of up to 100 kilometers. Then there is the NASAMS, or the National Surface-to-Air Missile System, again provided by the United States. Australia and Canada have sent M777 howitzers to Ukraine. This weapon has a range of 40 kilometers. Ukraine currently has over 100 of these M777 howitzers. Poland and Czech Republic have sent at least 230 tanks. These are NLAW next-generation light anti-tank weapon. They are lightweight and they have been crucial in stopping the advance of the Russian army. These weapons came in handy during the early days of the war, when the Russian troops were marching towards Kyiv. UK has sent over 5,000 of these anti-tank weapons to Ukraine. Not only have countries donated weapons to Ukraine, many have also sent crucial weapons wrapped in bills. Take Turkey, for example. The country sold Bayraktar TB2 armed drones to Ukraine. These drones have been effective in attacking Russian targets, including helicopters, naval vessels, and missile systems. The list is long, but not enough for Ukraine's appetite. President Volodymyr Zelensky's weapon wish list is ever expanding. After asking for air defense systems, Zelensky now wants the West to send tanks. But is the West in the position to play Santa and fill Zelensky's Christmas stockings?
And to discuss this and a lot more, I'm now being joined by Solomia Bobrovska, who's a member of Ukrainian Parliament. She's also on the Committee for National Security. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. Just wanted to get your sense on how the war is going and how important these tanks are.
So I would say that war is still in a very tough period and has very tough line, especially on the east, but still east and even southern part. I mean Bakhmut, Soledar, which is in Donetsk region, which is in the east of Ukraine, but still we are observing and we see how Russian army is moving, mobilizing, and still they are getting prepared for the second wave of mobilizing. We see what they are doing in Republic of Belarus, and unfortunately we are expecting new wave of this war and new invasion from Belarus side at the end of February, beginning of March. I would say war is still, even despite we have the weather below zero, especially in the east, remains to be a very tough. And why actually we are calling again and again for the hard weaponry. We all understand Russia is not ready to negotiate in any sense, and it means they are not ready to withdraw their Russian troops. We are still calling to the international law that they have to withdraw their troops to Ukrainian-Russian borders. And it means that result of this war will be shown only on the battlefield.
So on the battlefield, if that's what you're saying, where it's going to be, I know Ukraine has been asking for these tanks, right? And the Germans seem to be saying, let the Americans send tanks first, and the Americans are saying, we're not sure we can send tanks. Do you think you're going to be getting these tanks at all, or no? And do you have a contingency plan as to what you will do if you don't get tanks?
Well, first of all, we're not just thinking, we are almost sure that we will get all the tanks, not only from Germany, but from France, from Poland, from US. We will see these tanks. And just now started the 8th meeting in Ramstein. That means the whole all group Ukrainian friends gathering to finally make the resolution or conclusion what kind of weaponry we will be given to support now against Russian forces. So I just have no doubt that we will get the tanks. Unfortunately, we see so many discussions within the German politicians, and we still do not understand. They are so close affiliation and so close feelings to Russian Federation. They see what's going on and what's happening, and they are warning about that as well. Understanding that they have to increase even their military capabilities, producing as well. And I hope, and their Minister of Defense yesterday in the very late evening announced that they can give tanks even without the decision of U.S. decision, and still we see U.S. position. They are ready to give us tanks, and I think after today's meeting in Ramstein, we'll be on the other line of discussion, and finally we'll see that weaponry in Ukraine on the battlefield.
Right. Solomia Bobrovska, member of the Ukrainian Parliament, member of the Committee on National Security and Defense. Thank you so much for joining us and saying very clearly there's no choice but to fight and to keep fighting, and you need all the help that you can get. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, some rather strong views from Ukraine there. Well, let's just go across to Russia now and see what the Russian perspective in all of this is. We are now being joined by Mark Sleboda, who's international relations and security analyst there in Russia, joining us live from Moscow. Mark, welcome to WION. Mark, just wanted to understand, Western leaders are sitting and they're discussing this entire question of arming Ukraine, sending those trunks. How do you see this playing out? Obviously, Russia is warning the West against sending more weapons to Ukraine.
Yes, there is a great deal of panic and desperation among the Western states that are of NATO that are waging a proxy war against Russia, because the Kyiv regime, which they helped seize power in the country in 2014, has lost 2 armies in the last year. The first army that they started out with was the second largest army in Europe. It was built up, we now know from Macron and from Merkel, over the course of 8 years with NATO funding, training, and it consisted of some 2,500 tanks, some 13,000 infantry fighting vehicles and APCs, thousands of artillery pieces, dozens of fighter aircraft. That army is no more. It does not exist. The second army was sent from NATO countries and consisted of Soviet legacy equipment from the former Warsaw Pact and Eastern Bloc countries like Poland, Romania, Slovakia, and consisted of some 500 more tanks, hundreds more of infantry fighting vehicles. And it was peppered with MiGs, with dozens of modern NATO artillery systems, such as the HIMARS and the M777s. And that army also no longer exists. It was expended quite wastefully during the Kherson and Kharkov offenses, when the Russian forces fighting a war of attrition instead of a war of tactical maneuver simply retreated and continued to pound the oncoming Kiev regime forces across the open steppes of Kherson with its artillery and air advantage, causing enormous casualties. Now, as Russia has mobilized and gathered a strike force, yet uncommitted to the theater, of some 500,000 troops fully equipped, the West is panicking, and they're scrambling to escalate, to send whatever they possibly can drag, even out of their own armies. They've exhausted all of their stockpiles.
Assuming NATO's showing no signs of wanting to directly get into a fight with Russia, not so far attenuated.
I cannot agree with that perspective at all either. NATO is already providing C4 ISR. It has admitted in the pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times that they have hundreds of CIA operatives, special forces, directing Ukrainian forces on the battlefield. The United Kingdom was involved in the planning, equipping, and escalation of drone attacks on the Crimean Bridge and the Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol. The only thing that is separating NATO from a direct war on Russia is Kiev regime proxies pushing the button that they literally put in front of their faces. NATO is in a direct war with Russia at this moment.
All right. Just looking ahead now, What is the way out of this? Other than, I mean, I'm sure that Russia would say Ukraine should just surrender and give up completely. Assuming that's not on the table from the Ukrainian side, at some point, do you think this leads to discussion, to dialogue, to some sort of a peaceful exit from this? Or are we going to see this war continuing all through 2023?
This war will likely continue for several more years.
Several more years, you're saying?
Several more years, yes, absolutely. I don't see that there's any room for diplomacy with a West, which completely puppets their putsch regime in Kyiv, that has betrayed agreements of two forms of the Minsk Accords that were solidified in a UN Security Council resolution. And we have heard from both French and German leaders that it was all a deception, pulling something over Putin's eyes, making him believe that there was a peaceful reconciliation to the Ukrainian civil conflict. There's no partner with to conduct diplomacy that can be trusted. I mean, all conflicts end at the end with diplomacy. But the only way that this can bring a permanent peace to Ukraine and Russia is if the regime in Kyiv is completely defeated and removed, and NATO is driven completely out of the country and suffers a humiliating defeat.
Mark Sleboda, international relations security analyst from Russia. Thank you so much for talking to us from Moscow. Thanks so much. And I think just hearing both those voices really shows why Mark is probably correct. This war may well continue for months, if not years. It's not easy to say the way out, because you were just hearing from the Ukrainian side saying Russia needs to be defeated. It needs to be defeated by weapons and on the battlefield. That's the only way they'll negotiate. We've just heard the Russian side, well, Russian analysts saying that's exactly what has to happen. The reverse has to happen. Kyiv must be defeated, the regime must be thrown out, and Ukraine must be defeated. So this fighting, by the sound of it, could well continue for a while. So if you go by those statements, it seems clear that the war in Ukraine not ending anytime soon. And that's one of the reasons why the war and the impact of the war was probably one of the biggest talking points at Davos this year, when all the big global leaders and CEOs all gathered in Switzerland, as they always do at this time of the year.